or now maybe mid or seen, in their careers. And then, of course, the chief executive officers that they report to. Throughout my career, I've always used data, whether it be at IBM when I first started, or at a phone Pacific Bell is a phone company in California many years ago. American Express, Intercontinental Bank of America, and Fannie Mae is a financial organization in the United States that backs home mortgages. Next slide, please. So I just mentioned it briefly here, and this is what we're going to talk about for the next hour, the changing role of data. I mean, today's economy, data is not just a commodity, but data is an invaluable asset. No whether you're a government agency, a profit organization, a nonprofit, everything focuses around your capturing, storing, providing access to, and interpreting data to run your organization. And what's happened is, again, my background is from both in finance and operations and manufacturing. So I kind of take a little bit of a finance question here. And the regulatory requirements throughout the world, not only in your country and India, but Canada and United States, Asia, the regulatory accounting standards have not kept up with the pace of the emergence of this valuable, I'm going to say, new asset called data. If you look at a balance sheet, for those of you who are doing accounting or finance, a balance sheet has your assets, and data is an intangible asset. Yet, I challenge any one of you to go to a corporation's balance sheet and find the value that they've assigned to their data assets. And we look at companies such as Netflix or Amazon or Google, the whole company is based on data and how they use that data. So that's a huge asset. But there's no way that they record it. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on, some of the challenges of why they're not doing that in their financial reporting. Next slide, please. Okay. We're in a battle right now. We engage every day. If you're an organization and you want to be successful, you're in a daily battle for data supremacy. It's not, this is something that you don't look at once a week, once a month, once a quarter, once a year. You have to look at your data every day and how you manage it. And the problem we're going to talk about throughout this hour is that we have great technologies that can benefit and leverage the data. The problem is that most organizations have a lack of trust in their data. Not only the data that they acquire from outside sources, but even their internal data. And again, we're going to go into a little bit more detail as we go on during the next hour here. But it's very important that you have to manage data. And what does that mean? And you cannot successfully implement any form of generative AI, simply or older style AI neural networks, or any advanced decision making tool without the right data. Because as we know, and many of you I'm sure have experience and probably had pretty good experience with like ChatGPT or Google Gemini, you can upload. Well, the system is not smart enough to know if that's good or bad data. It learns from that data. So therefore, the technology works great, but it's only as good as the data that you feed into it to benefit us. Next slide, please. So here's some basic statistics, and these are from 2023. I have more recent ones. I just, they're all over the place. But on average, companies collect vast amounts of data, especially now when they have what's called IoT, uh, where they're collecting data from sensors throughout a business process. Let's say your vehicle in most cases collects millions of bits of information and gets sent somewhere to the car manufacturer. And they can predict reliability, warranty costs. They can do all kinds of things with it and tell you to bring in your car because your motor is overheating before it really becomes a problem. And everything we do in our life, there's sensors anymore measuring data and it's feeding to a massive data set. The problem is those data sets are so massive that no one has enough human resources to go and analyze it. So on average, companies analyze 40%, 30%, plus or minus 10%. And therefore, the max amounts of data they collect get totally unused. Even with the data, again, my previous statement, organizations don't trust their data. So this is one number. There's numbers, all kinds of numbers out there floating around from different studies, but this study said that 24% of executives say that companies are not data driven. And what that means is the technology we have now, you want to get to what's called data driven decision making, or DDDM. And what that means is we would allow the systems to make decisions based on data without any human intervention. So the systems would be autonomous and they would make decisions whether to increase production, stop production, schedule a third shift, halt production because of quality issues, manage contracts where the contract terms can be enforced through contract administration, through systems. There's all these things that we want to get to, and basically a lights out environment in some cases, such as marketing or finance or supply chain or quality. I personally think, and I may be too aggressive in my thinking, that we might see something like this happen by 2028. So only 2 years from now. When you look at the data, and everyone's talking about using generative AI, generative agents, when you look at the number of agents that are actually put into real production, it's down to the single digits, 1%, 2%. Although you'll have data that shows 60, 80% of companies are attempting to do pilots, the pilots often fail. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, in a little more detail. But they fail for a multitude of reasons. Um, so when you hear the reality that these agents are actively performing tasks in companies, they probably are in selected areas. And most of the areas you'll see generative agents used in customer service or call centers, primarily. It's easy to do. When you look at a generative agent, it needs to learn a business process. And a business process has multiple activities. And so if those activities are simple, are routine, and limited risk, then companies are adopting it at a very snail's pace. They're trying things, but actually putting them in production is very slow and very limited worldwide. Um, Companies want to use big data. So even before generative AI, when they started using data and using more like linear regressions and other methods of using it to predict things, big data solutions increase profits significantly. So the proof is there. In this case here is by 8%, and they also have a 10% reduction in costs on average. Um, Again, the numbers can vary a couple percentage, but you can see an ROI, and that's what's very important. Next slide, please. So I said earlier that it's a trust question, and different studies, KPMG study, a big accounting firm, KPMG, 56% of CPOs and CEOs and theirs have concerns regarding the integrity of their own data. 90% of CEOs say their businesses leave money on the table during negotiations due to lack of data and lack of knowledge on how to use the data. It's one thing to collect the data, it's another thing to interpret the data and act on it. And then this study here showed 70% of executives view contract data as an important source of financial insights. I just read an article today, and I think it was by Harvard. I think it was a Harvard Business Review. It came out and saying that over 70% of this study of chief executive officers that they just conducted feel that they fail to use generative agents within their business, they will probably no longer be employed by that company. So they're getting pressure from the board of directors to deliver. At the same time, you just can't buy technology. You have to have the data to put into the technology to make it work. Next slide, please. So where does data fit? The old organizations, when companies would say, what are the strengths? It would always be kind of in three categories: people, process, and technology. They said that's how we can rate a company. They have great people, they have great processes, and they have great technology. The new world says it's people, data. What data do they have? Process and technology. And these are actually in hierarchy, going down. So the most important asset anyone can have is their people. In today's world, the next valuable asset is data. Processes are not simple, but can be changed. And technology you buy. Before 5, 10 years ago, you would have to create a data center of your own. That means the computer center, the storage devices, the networks, etc. And it was very expensive because you have to build the building, have power to it, air condition it so the computers don't overheat, etc. Today's world, you don't need a data center. And these data centers could cost hundreds of millions of dollars for large corporations. You just buy what you want today. You buy capacity from Amazon, computing capacity or storage capacity from Amazon, from Google, you name it. They're all in the data center business. So the priorities have changed now on how you rank an organization when you evaluate them. Again, people as being the most important, the data that you have that's accessible to you to run your business, and then the processes, and then the technology. Next slide, please. Okay. An important thing to think about, and my goal today is to let you think about data, think in a broad way, but data doesn't, the value of data doesn't diminish with the use. Certain things like materials, if you use something or a machine over time becomes less valuable because it starts to wear out, it starts to lose its ability to hold tolerances, etc. Data is not like that. Hundreds of people can use the same data and it doesn't diminish in its value. What diminishes relative to data is time. A lot of data is only available, when you look at marketing organizations, some of their data now is, if it's a couple days old, it's really old, or a week or a month, forget it. So data diminishes in value over time, but not diminishing through its use. And data, it's changed its role because data today is what we're trying to do with generative AI is we're trying to use it to predict going forward based on what's happened in the past with a reasonable degree of confidence. And data before was used to record or memorialize something that happened in the past. So when we're looking at data to memorialize something, if it's off a little bit, but it happened in the past, kind of who cares? I mean, we are where we are today as the organization, and it either had a negative or positive effect on it, but it's something that we can't do anything about. Now we're trying to use data to predict. So therefore, the value, the credibility of it, the accuracy, the completeness, the relevance, it's very important. And today's systems too, it's not just focused on what we call, uh, data that's structured data. Structured data is what we have in a spreadsheet or a database. Today's systems can use unstructured data and make sense out of them. Unstructured data is a video clip, an audio clip, an email message. These sources of information, data, and knowledge and wisdom were not available before. We couldn't organize it in a way that we could structure it, label it, and gain value out of it. So with the new technology, we've made major strides in creating new sources of data and information that didn't exist 5 years ago or as far as 10 years ago. Um, and we're also looking at systems now can take into what's called situational awareness. What that means is it's good if you have a company and you have to, let's say, we're going to buy some new uh, raw materials. So we'll keep it real simple. So we have the raw material cost, we have the transportation costs, we have maybe a few other variables. But that was the only information that we had that we could put into a system to help us decide, is this a good decision? Can we manage any associated risks, etc.? In today's world, our systems can take into account situational awareness. And what that means is our systems today with generative AI, we could take into the political atmosphere or environment, excuse me, of where that raw material is coming from. We could take into consideration weather and how weather could impact the transport of that material to us. We could take into consideration maybe that organization has a union and maybe the union contract is up or they're on strike or the power is not reliable where that mineral is mined from. We can take all these new variables and help us make a decision. Where in the past we couldn't do that. But again, this is all data. Next slide, please. So data technology is outpacing our data quality. As we all know, and I'm sure many of you, or if not most of you or all of you, are using, like I say, ChatGPT, Google Gemini, whatever generative agent tool to help you write papers, etc. The technology is advancing considerably and at an extremely fast rate. The quality of the data that goes into there is falling far short of accelerating in its quality, relevance, and completeness. And I'll give you an example. I don't know if anybody here on the call is aware of, of a methodology called the Altman Z score. And what that's used for, it's a lot of stockbrokers and supply chain management people, etc. It's a methodology, it's an algorithm that's been created and proven pretty reliable to forecast the financial strength of a company in the future. And it has 7 ratios, and there's a methodology to control the ratios, and then a certain weights get assigned to each ratio, and it comes out with a single numeric value. And I'll just say it's like a 3. If it comes out with a 3, you can interpret that as that company should be financially sound for the next 2 years. If it comes out with a 2, it's somewhat questionable, the financial strength of that company 2 years from now. If it comes out with a 1, it means you better look somewhere else because this company could be going bankrupt. And so I use Google Gemini, and I actually wrote a two-section article on this a few months ago. And I put in 2 big companies because the algorithm needs to access financial reports. So I put in International Business Machines, IBM, and General Electric, or GE. They're both large corporations. Their financial records are available online. And I asked Google Gemini to do this Altman Z analysis for these 2 companies. Literally, in 2 or 3 seconds, my first attempt, it came back. It not only knew about what the Altman Z score methodology was, but it knew it had to go out and collect certain data elements from financial reports for IBM and GE. It knew how to calculate it. It gave me a score, and then it gave me interpretation of how to interpret the score. And I'm thinking like, wow, this is so impressive, right? This can save hours and hours of time where people now have to do it, a mechanical way. I said, I got to make sure this works. So I copied and pasted exactly the query that I put into Google Gemini. I ran it again, literally a minute or 2 later. Again, I didn't key it in because I didn't want to have a keying data entry error. I just copied and pasted. It came back. It was complete. Excuse me. It was right, but it wasn't complete. It recognized and knew what that Altman Z score was. It knew it needed to get some financial data, but it couldn't find it the second time for some reason. And I tried it again. It was the same thing. So the methodology of how some of these systems work is not consistent. It takes a different path when trying to answer your query. I tried it now about a week or 2 ago, and they've obviously made changes. to Google Gemini, and it hit on 100% 3 times in a row. So these tools are getting better. Okay, so the technology is moving very fast, but what we're doing with data quality and how we're working on it is far, far below where it needs to be in order to truly leverage the technology. Next slide, please. So when you think about how data is used, it's used traditionally to complete a transaction. That's how most data was used. I mean, you'd order something, you'd track something, you'd schedule it. It's to complete a transaction, a work in process transaction, a payment process, an ordering process, a quality process, etc. Or data now is being used to create new or support existing knowledge. And that's what we're trying to do in organizations. Organizations are trying, you have to operate based on knowledge. And organizations, large ones, have what they call organizational knowledge. It's made up of people. And people have expertise, tacit or explicit knowledge, right? Explicit is when you can document it and record it somehow. And tacit is you know something, but it's not documented or not documentable. And I often said that an organization, you have to be scared because when those employees of your organization walk out the door at night, the knowledge in most cases of an organization also walks out the door, and you hope they come back. I had the privilege of being invited, along with about 10 other people, to the White House a few years ago because for some wisdom, which the federal government had, which I don't give them a lot of credit for having a lot of wisdom, but especially the current regime, but they came to the realization that they were going to have a lot of people retire from the federal government. And they were concerned that the knowledge to run the government would be retiring. And so they had the wisdom to bring people in from private sector and government, other government agencies to try to figure out what they should do about this because data is everywhere. Um, and we talk a little another slide here, the frequency of where the data is, but again, data is only as valuable as the organization's processes, decisions, and interaction it enables. You can have lots of data and do nothing with it, and you don't benefit from it. And again, we want data. And if I could have the next slide, please. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. Maybe some of these other slides I know will present this a little bit better in a visual. Well, here I mentioned the data, consistency of data. And many studies show that on average, there's 12 copies or versions of a data set in an organization. How do you know which one's right? And when you use ETL, or what that is mass transfer of data from different systems. It's called ETL. 80% of ETL transfers have some form of error. So if you have 12 versions of data, and there's the original data set, which someone created for some purpose, someone else downloaded that, put it on their laptop, modified it for some other purpose, and presented it. A third party found that second set of data, and said, oh, I'm going to use it for this interpretation, modified it a little bit. And pretty soon you have theoretically multiple sets of data which are supposedly consistent, but aren't. And if any of you have tried using data sets, what you'll find is there's no record of its lineage. What I mean by that is there's no record of where it came from, in most cases, who modified it, how they modified it, for what purpose, was the data even the right type of data to make that type of decision. Some data, if you're running a low risk situation, you don't have to be that concerned. I mean, you're looking for directional data, not precise data. So like this, if you're running a company and say, oh, I think I need to run a second or third shift next week, that's an expensive proposition, but it's not going to bring the company to its knees if you build up too much inventory by bringing people in on those other shifts. If you're using data to decide where you're going to, you know, build your next production facility or research lab, that's strategic. You have to make sure that that data is relevant, accurate, complete, timely, etc. Next slide, please. This is very important. This is kind of the maturity level of how organizations evolve to using data. And on the far left, you see descriptive analytics, and that's kind of just how we use data in almost every place. It's the first thing you do. It's like, what happened, right? You want to see what took place. As you advance your use of data and your maturity of how to use it, you move to the next level and you use diagnostic analysis and you try to say, how did it happen? And as we're going up this continuum from left to right, the value of data becomes higher and higher. Most organizations are in the first block, the script and analytics, and maybe some are in the diagnostic analytics. We're moving to, but there's very few that are really using it. What will happen, the predictive use of data, and then what should we do about it, the prescriptive, and then what don't I know? And that's kind of going to knowledge and wisdom. But we'll talk about that, I think, on the next slide. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, it's maybe the next one after. Well, let's stay right here. So what we have is we have data, raw data goes to information. What do we mean by that? Information is when we, like a spreadsheet, we add, we summarize, we take it and we create a visualization of it, some form, and we either create new knowledge at that point or we support existing knowledge. We're at the information level. Then knowledge goes to wisdom. And what do we mean by that is knowledge kind of says we, given the data that we have and its conversion to information, we should take the next steps. Wisdom is the next level of that continuum that talks about, situational awareness, like I mentioned earlier. We could say that the all the data leads to information that says we should close this factory. Let's just say that, and that our knowledge is close this factory. But our wisdom would say, wait a minute, we need to consider other factors, like will we need to rebuild that capacity
Well, it's so
somewhere else? What would it cost us to build it? Do we have regulations that would prohibit us from shutting it down now? Do we have to give advance notice for 6 months or a year when we're affecting people's jobs? Maybe we're heavily dependent on energy. Do we have energy available in that new location? Do we have tax benefits that we should take into consideration? If we put it in another country, we need to consider foreign currency exchange rates and their predictive value 3, 4, 5 years from now, given that'll take us that long to build this new factory. So we have this data flow and its conversion from raw data to information. Again, information, summarizing it, adding it, creating a visualization, into knowledge. But then we go knowledge into this wisdom. And the new systems now are looking at wisdom because, again, it's using unstructured data. It's using weather data. It's using emails. It's using video clips, articles that appear in magazines or research, which we couldn't do 5 years ago. Next slide, please. I hope I'm creating a little bit of questions in your mind about, how does data, and here's this continuum that I talked about. We start with data, going to information, to knowledge, to wisdom. And when you look at the lower level, it's a pretty linear progression. Most cases, it goes from data to information relatively simply. And we can kind of predict the level of effort to get it there. It becomes a different slope when we go into knowledge and wisdom. But as we go farther out, of course, the value it brings is considerably higher. Next slide, please. So, benefits of being data driven. And this is a study, done by MIT. It's 4% productivity improvement. They can quantify that if you start to use data, and 6% higher profits. So there's a lot of work coming out of MIT. I'm a senior advisor at MIT and the Chief Data Officer Information Quality Society, big long name. But we're trying to advance the use. Dr. Richard Wang there, I work with him, and they have They just held their 18th annual conference, and this conference is amazing because there's several hundred people in attendance and several hundred people online uh, every year. And you would think the topic of data would be totally developed, and people have this well under hand as far as within the organization. And by the sheer volume of attendance of people from all different industries, all different parts of the world, you could see that this is a huge, huge need for people like yourselves when you come out of school to help develop and use data better. Next slide, please. So the cost of not being data focused. Next slide, please. And it's very important. I mean, I have a couple examples here that 60% of organizations don't measure the annual financial costs of poor data. They don't know what it costs them. They don't measure it. They don't know how to measure it. So, we have lots of data, but if it's poor, uh, you know, you'll find in organizations they have a lot of regulations and policies about retaining data. They have very few policies on when you can get rid of data, and they have very few methodologies about how do you determine the data is any good or relevant. Most cases, organizations don't have what's called a data audit, and that's different than an IT audit. Actually, we put out a paper at our website, and that's probably one of the um, most heavily referred to or viewed documents that we have. And it's an outline about how you conduct a data audit. I've gone into organizations, in my own organizations in the past too. You ask the question like, who's in charge of your data? Well, what does that mean? Like, who says that that is a good data source for our business? Who says that data can only last or be used for 1 month or 1 year because after that it's not relevant? Um, who determines, you know, the the legacy of that data? Um, in most cases, you'll see people, they'll say, well, information technology handles that. That's not the case. Information technology organizations, they're responsible for collecting data, storing it, controlling access to it, and hopefully prevent it from being, uh, attacked or destroyed in any way. They are not responsible for validating that the data is approved for use. That's not their job. So in most organizations, you'll find when you walk in, you ask that question, everybody looks at each other and they find out that there is no one in charge. Um, it's very, very eye-opening because, oh yeah, we use data in everything. We use data in all of our decisions. Okay, who's in charge of it? Well, somebody. Who? It's some fictitious person. They're in charge of it. So again, data quality, some studies show that 30% of annual revenue is the cost of poor data quality. And a study from IBM said the U.S. economy's the cost of poor data is around $3 trillion per year. Next slide, please. In certain industries, they're getting very, very concerned about this. And in the financial services, of course, data has to be right, correct, relevant, complete, etc. So a large bank called Citibank, which is a worldwide bank, and probably most of you have heard of it, it's 12th largest bank in the world and fourth in the US. In 2010, the Office of Currency of the Controller, which is the US government regulatory body that regulates banks and certifies them to operate. And they had a daily audit, or excuse me, an annual audit, and they found that the bank's data was quality insufficient. That was in 2020. In 2024, they went back and conducted a same audit and found that the bank still was insufficient. And this time, they fined the bank $136 million for failing to improve their data quality. And there's a cost that somebody can put their hands around and say that was $136 million cost of poor data quality. And again, if they don't improve, this organization called the Office of Controller of the Currency, they can take away their what's called their bank charter, which means they can take away their ability to have a bank in the United States if they don't meet the OCC requirements. So this is not just pay the fine and move on. This is pay the fine and you better fix it, or you may not be able to have a bank within the US. Next slide, please. In the UK, another example, the National Audit Office has to sign off on the government accounts every year. In 2024, it's the first time that this governing body, this National Audit Office, refused to sign off on the British government's budget. And they said 90% of the local authorities failed to submit reliable data. This is not unique to the UK. This is not unique to the US. I know through some limited research I've done that, in India, you're facing the same problems. I mean, we all are. I know in India, they've created the National Statistics Commission, who struggles to promote better data generation, analysis, and use. The government in India has created the Data Governance Quality Index, or the DGQI, again, focusing on how government agencies can improve the quality and reporting of data. They're working on what's called data literacy, which is training people how to use data, how to interpret data, when to use it, things to be aware of. And then you also have an organization that I don't know, I can't remember off the top of my head what it stands for, but it's NITI. And they have some pretty impressive results where they showed that over the last few years, improving the data quality, they've been able to make some significant cost savings to not only consumer levels, but different parts of the Indian government. So there's a great opportunity for you to work with or get involved with or study what your government is doing, because they realize that they have a quality issue, data quality issue also, and it's costing them huge amounts of money. Next slide, please. So poor data quality says several areas that it impacts. So it could measure productivity, quality, or service levels, and those are measurable costs. Those are something you can probably get your hands around and put a value to. But it also kind of has some subjective costs, which is the organization's reputation could be at stake for poor quality, and also compliance reporting, meaning reports to the government for multiple purposes. Next slide, please. So individual daily data usage hurdles, that's the way I'm phrasing this, it's challenges every day. Most organizations you will find that people can't find the data they need to do their jobs. Maybe on a routine thing, yes. But if someone asks them to do something a little bit non-routine, most organizations say it could take 1 to 2 days to find the data. And you don't even know if it's good or not, but at least you found something. Most analysts spend, and you'll see this number referred to in a multitude of studies, this range. These studies have shown that because of the poor quality of most data, data analysts can spend 60 to 80% of their time collecting, cleaning, labeling, and organizing data for use. That means that they're only analyzing the data 20 or 40% of the time. So it's a huge workload. It's a huge productivity impact, negative productivity impact on analysts, but it has to be done. Um, Again, I mentioned before this data lineage, knowing where this data came from, what version is it? Is there a version control of it? Who did what when to the data? Standardizing data for data integration. What you'll find in most cases right now is it's a technical issue and it's a data issue. One of the things that generative agents are having a hard time doing is integrating with legacy systems from a technology standpoint. How do we have APIs or application program interfaces for these systems to communicate with each other? But then it's also important that the data in many cases isn't standardized. So you have databases that this data is collected weekly. This data is collected every day. This data is collected once an hour. This data, it uses metrics. Um, this data uses different quantities of volume. I know ran into a study recently that showed one company was having a real hard time with their data because in one part of the world, the units of measure were 12 to a box. So it was a box, but you could assume that there were 12 units in that box. Another part of the world, same company, used single units of measure. So for every item, it was a value of one. Or the other organization, for every unit of measure, it had a value of 12. Well, try to balance that inventory out, right? And when you say here's the unit cost of a unit, in one place it's a single piece of item, and the other unit is 12. Well, everything's thrown off for the cost, the pricing, the number of inventory. So you have these challenges even within simple, even within organizations. I remember years ago we worked with Xerox, and Xerox we had Xerox copiers. Copiers aren't that useful anymore because everything's digital. But we had Rank Xerox, Fuji Xerox, and US Xerox. Well, they made the same product in all three regions. They were different models. They had operated on different voltage in different parts of the world. They had different warranties, which is interesting, and they had different prices. Even if you took into consideration the foreign exchange rate conversion, they were different prices. Why? We were dealing with Xerox around the world for the same product, but we're paying different prices. So again, you can see how easily this is, especially in a large international organization, how this standardization is absolutely critical. The other thing is one of the challenges is a lot of people don't have access to friendly data analytics tools. Now that's getting better. And your studies will also show that the common tool right now still is Excel, which is kind of interesting to collect data, clean it, analyze it. Although people are uploading Excel or Google Sheets or whatever up into generative agent tools and they're doing the analysis there. But if they're not using the generative agent route, Excel is still the predominant tool to use to collect, analyze, and clean data. And then the other one is a lot of times people who have a need for data aren't allowed access to the data. So that's another challenge, or they don't even know it exists. And then when they do know it exists, they can't find out who they have to talk to so that they can get routine access to that data. Next slide, please. So we rarely measure the following related to data. We don't manage it, we don't measure its cost. Data is either produced internally, so we have to figure out how much it costs us to produce that data, collect it, storage. In other cases, we might buy the data from a third party. And who's in charge and who reviews the sources of data to say we should continue this source, whether it be internal or external? How much should we pay for the data? No one really knows. We don't necessarily correlate a benefit from the data. Again, earlier we said that companies don't measure the benefit. We don't understand its lineage or its history. we don't data when you look at data, it doesn't have a quality rating. It doesn't say this is 90% good, 80% good, 60% good. We take it in blind faith, assuming that it has to be all good, which is obviously not correct. But there is no quality rating. There is no measure of how to use data efficiently. We could have three people do an analysis, the same analysis, they don't even know that they're doing it and coming up with maybe the same answer or a slightly different answer. It's just like accounting, right? You can look at the same set of data, but you come up with different answers from a tax perspective or net profit or whatever. How many variables you want to include in your analysis. And then again, going back to we never establish a useful life for data. Like I said, we never said that this data is only good for 30 days, and at the end of 30 days, it should be removed from our system, or it's good for a year, and it's only good for these types of decisions, meaning strategic or tactical. Next slide, please. I hope you're realizing through this whole thing that this whole data thing is huge. You got to really think about it as we're moving to a completely data-driven society. Its importance is even greater than it was even a year or two ago. So the stages of data can be collected, it can be transported, it can be cleaned, labeled, organized, interpreted, presented, and reused. A lot of things to be done. Labeling is very important when you're using data. What are you calling that data element? And again, as you're integrating more and more legacy systems into generative AI or any other system to system, that labeling is important because you will find variances, I'll guarantee you, in 95% of the times, it's labeled something different in the other data set that you're trying to merge, or the time frame is different, like I said. Next slide, please. So it's so important, as I said earlier, it should show up on a balance sheet, right? Data is this huge asset, but there's no common way of establishing its value. And those of you who have taken accounting courses, you establish a value of an item. You have what's called the depreciation method, which means you lower its value through time or through use. If 100 parts are made on this machine and the machine value decreases because its tolerance can't be held, etc., over time, right? Simple example. And so usually an asset starts being placed in some ledger that says we bought or this value of this asset costs us X. So we just said it's very hard to establish what the cost of data is. The next thing is, as I said, data doesn't lose its value through usage, it's through time. So again, depreciation methods are you allocate a cost on some fixed period of time. Well, nobody knows how long that data is good for. So we're missing now two of the dimensions we need for depreciation. And then the third element of depreciation is what's called residual value, which means when you get through with that asset, it has a value to somebody of X. Well, what's the value of it after we've used the data? We don't know. Next slide, please. So data is this intangible asset that we can't figure out how to show it on a balance sheet, but it's absolutely critical to every organization, whether you're fundraising or whatever. The data is valuable, right? Your list of contributors and your events and how much everybody gave and blah blah blah. There's data all over this. So again, data can be purchased, developed as a result of a business process, collected from customers, developed from research, etc. There's a multitude of sources that we get. And again, this is any organization, whether it be a government organization, a for-profit organization, etc. Next slide, please, because I know we're getting to the end of our hour here. So what I want you to think about when you leave academia and you go into a job and you may or may not be in charge of data, but you'll definitely use data. Start to think about what's the cost of data? Am I spending more money to collect this data than it's worth? Again, we talked about an engine that produces, hundreds of thousands of data elements an hour. Do we need all those? Or do we just need the variables that are outside an approved parameter? Do I need to know that it's 100% of the time that engine is at, you know, 98 degrees Fahrenheit? I don't really care that it's, 99%. I want to know when that temperature of that engine suddenly spikes to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. So we've got to think about what the data we're collecting, why we're collecting it, and what are the parameters to collecting it. Again, kind of think about what's a useful life for the data, the residual value, but there's no standard way of recording it from a financial accounting perspective of the regulatory agents that control our accounting methodologies throughout the world. It's the most financial accounting uh, organizations, standard organizations, have studied this, and the studies 100% conclude their answer is further study is required, which means they don't have an answer. Eventually they will, but right now they don't. Next slide, please. Immediate actions. When you go out and you work in the workforce, immediately you should set up some data governance. Because again, you're collecting vast amounts of data every second, every minute, every hour of the day. So you need to put some governance around that, meaning, some measurements, where you collect the data, how frequently you collect it, what is the format of the data, etc. Who owns that? Somebody has to own the data. If we're going to use it, they need to make sure that it meets certain requirements. Somebody needs to own that data. And you need to start standardizing classifications. You need to create a data audit. And like I say, we couldn't find one, so we created our own on our website. So you're more than welcome to go look at it, check it out. And the data audit guideline, it's probably like 30, 40 pages long, but I would suggest you go right to about the middle. And in the middle, there's like 54 questions, I think. And it asks logical questions. There's no right or wrong answer. It's thought provoking. And it'll make you think about what you need to do. And if you could say, yes, we're doing things in all those 50, you're really managing your data quality, an outstanding way. Next slide, please. So I'm going to end here with generative agents. And we talked earlier, right? These agents are extremely powerful. I gave you the example where I did something with Google Gemini and it worked well and then it didn't work, but now it works consistently well. So they're improving, they're working on their large language models every day. They're getting better, they're getting more complete, getting more thorough. But again, they're only as good as the data you put into it. So generative agents, the challenge of implementing generative agents is the data quality, the labeling, the cleaning, the organizing, etc. Trust by the users and management and the data that goes into the generative agent. A lot of the challenge right now is change management. People are worried that these tools, these large language models, are going to take away their jobs. And so they're very, very fearful and they're reluctant to use it. And what we have to start thinking about is use these agents to help us do our job. Will it eliminate some jobs? Absolutely. We have to be honest with each other. But the people who engage in learning how to use generative agents as part of their tool set to perform the job, they're the people who are going to be in high demand because these corporations are going to demand that these tools be used as soon as they gain greater trust in the data that goes into the tool. And we got to look at workflows. Sometimes you look at this stuff, it doesn't make any sense. We did it because it was a manual process or semi-manual. If you can automate it, maybe you can skip a whole bunch of things or do them quicker. Another big area in the failure of deploying generative agents is unclear objectives. We're not clear as to what we want it to do. We just want to do something. Let's do something because if we don't do something, we're going to get behind the curve. And that, unfortunately, is the downfall of a large number of organizations. They spend money without a clear objective. The pilot fails, and everybody says, why did that happen? So take the time. If you're not playing in this sandbox right now, if you're a week or two or a month later, believe me, that 1 or 2 weeks or a month of planning and deciding what you really want these tools to provide it's going to pay high dividends at the end of the pilot. And the other challenge, big challenge right now, as I mentioned before throughout the whole presentation, is it's these integration with legacy systems. It's the technology integration. What we're finding right now is we will have agents, and we'll have specific agents to do certain things. We'll have an agent that does, advertising, buying. We'll have another agent to do accounts payable. Where the synergy comes is when these agents can work as a team. And what we're working on right now is language that these individual agents can use to communicate with each other. It's just like, a football team. You have specialists, or any kind of sport, you have specialists who do certain things. But when they work collectively, that's how they win the games. But they can be superstars individually. And what we need to do is have these languages that allow us for these agents to communicate. So I know I'm pretty much, I think, a little bit over. So I'm going to end right there. That's the end of the slides. I apologize if I went through too quickly. My goal was to have you start to think about how you use data. What are some of the obstacles? They all can be overcome. We just need to think about how to address them. I thank you for your time. I hope this was valuable insight. I hope you're all starting to think about something that came out of this. And if that happens, I would be very pleased that we had a successful session. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Professor. It was an intellectual celebration. You gave a very comprehensive idea about data. I'm very certain that our students would appreciate this and have gained a lot. Any quick questions about the students and faculty? Professor will spend another few minutes with you,
Sure.
in case I have any few questions. You can either unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat box. Remember, it's almost 11:30 p.m. for Professor. He is spending his vacation, and that too late night. So we need to appreciate the knowledge sharing responsibility of our Professor. So if you have any quick questions, kindly put it in the chat box. We need to let Professor sleep and have his good night's sleep as well. We cannot keep him waiting.
Well, not a problem. I hope that, again, this gave you a different perspective of
Of course,
how to look at data and some of the challenges and some of the potential future benefits. I mean, it's unlimited. So
yes, Professor. It was a bird's eye view. It was very comprehensive, well packaged. You had planned it carefully. We see the work that has gone behind to put things together and present it. Any questions? Dr. Jeffrey would be putting an assessment Google form. Those students who score above 80 percentage, the content of the questions would be based on whatever professor had been uh, telling you, right, this 1 hour. Dr. Jeffrey was smart enough to collate all the questions, put it together in a Google form, and the link would be live only for 5 minutes. This is only for those who attended. The others cannot participate because they will not be able to answer the questions. And the certificates will be given to those who score above 80 percentage, US standards.
great. Well, again, thank you very much for the
Thank
opportunity,
you.
and good luck to everyone in the futures.
Thank you so much, Professor.
My
We hope that you constantly keep meeting our faculty and students.
my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jeffrey sir, we can close the session. After you put the chat, students can download it and start answering.
Students, the question is live now in the chat box. Please open the chat box and take the participate the quiz. As instructed by Dean sir, only those who are attending will get the certificates. The quiz will be open only for 5 minutes. Make sure you are doing it on time.
Everything is a record, my dear. See here. Yesterday. So after Ishwar is not coming. It's going to get released, right? How attendance is given to Ishwar?
Sir, shall I close the session, sir?
Jeffrey sir, I think all students who are present would have downloaded the Google Sheet. So I think we'll close it here. Ensure that only those who score above 80% get the certificate, sir.
They were given my
வரிசையா வந்து அட்மிட் கொடுத்தோம் இவனே அட்மிட் பண்ணுங்க
Sir, we can close it, sir.
இப்போ நம்ம ஏதோ பெரிய students, hope you have all accessed the chat box. I'm closing the session as of now, and the link will be closed in another 2 to 3 minutes. Thank you so much for all.
You click your CV. I know how to do corrections.